Hello there and welcome to Tuesday in Parliament. Coming up in the next half hour, as Theresa May sets out her Brexit plans, in the Commons MPs are told both houses will have a vote on the final deal. The Northern Ireland Secretary calls for a respectful election following the breakdown of the Stormont Assembly. And is it time for an overhaul of business rates?
When you look at high streets around the country, they're full of charity shops, estate agents and the odd coffee shop.
But first, the Prime Minister has confirmed that the UK will leave the European Union single market as a result of Brexit. Theresa May made the announcement during her first major speech, outlining her strategy for taking Britain out of the EU. Mrs May said she wanted to build a stronger Britain in charge of its own laws, in control of immigration and pursuing free trade. And she warned Europe's leaders that no deal for Britain was better than a bad deal. Well, in the Commons, the Brexit Secretary set out the proposals to MPs.
It's a plan to build a strong new partnership with our European partners, while reaching beyond the borders of Europe too, forging deeper links with old allies and new ones. Today we set out 12 objectives for negotiation to come. They answer the questions of those who have been asking what we intend, while not undermining the UK's negotiating position. We are clear what we seek is that new partnership, not a partial EU membership, not a model adopted by other countries, not a position that means we're half in and half out. So our objectives are clear: to deliver certainty and clarity wherever we can, to take control of our own laws, to protect and strengthen the Union, to maintain the common travel area with the Republic of Ireland, to control immigration, to protect the rights of EU nationals in the UK and UK nationals in the European Union, to protect workers' rights, to allow free trade with the European markets, to forge new trade deals with other countries, to boost science and innovation, to protect and enhance cooperation over crime, terrorism and security, and to make our exit smooth and orderly. It's the outline of an ambitious new partnership between the UK and the countries of the European Union. And we're under no illusions. Agreeing terms that work for both the UK and the 27 nations of the European Union will be challenging. And no doubt there will be bumps on the road once talks begin. We must embark on the negotiation clear, however, that no deal is better than a bad deal.
As the Prime Minister knows, setting out ambitions is the easy bit. Delivery is more difficult, much more difficult. The Prime Minister has taken the precarious course of taking the UK out of single market membership and changing the customs arrangements. This will cause concern to businesses, as the Secretary of State knows, and to trade unions. And the Prime Minister should have been more ambitious.
I think we should loyally support the government. Will the Secretary of State confirm this, that insisting on controlling our own borders and insisting on doing international trade deals is inconsistent not just with membership of the European Union but also the customs union and the single market? So I agree, after the welcome tone of today's speech, it's not hard Brexit, it's full Brexit.
The Prime Minister, in the first part of her speech, made a welcome commitment to enhance and protect workers' rights, but at the end was threatening to take them away and to undercut the rest of Europe and rip up the British economic model if we don't get what we want. Can he now withdraw that threat and be clear that Britain will not do that? Because otherwise, if the government is prepared to rip up workers' rights, as soon as the negotiations get difficult, how can we trust them to ensure that the rest of Britain's interests are protected if the negotiations get difficult as well?
I'll say to her what I said to the head of the TUC only a couple of weeks ago. There is no circumstance under which we will rip up workers' rights.
My right honourable friend in his speech made clear that no deal is better than a bad deal. In the unlikely, I'm sure, event that we were to get a bad deal and the House were to vote against it, what would be the impact in terms of our status within the European Union?
Well, the referendum last year set in motion a circumstance where the UK is going to leave the European Union, and it won't change that. What we want to have is a vote so the House can be behind and support the policy which we are quite sure they will approve of when we get there.
What I don't understand when reading the Prime Minister's statement or listening to my right honourable friend is which country in the world is going to enter into a trade agreement with this country on the basis that the rules are entirely what the British say they're going to be on any particular day, and if there's any dispute about the rules, it's going to be sorted out by the British government.
Well, those on that side have a very short memory. I mean, I can forgive my right honourable friend. He didn't hear the very first question, which is on exactly this point. And I answered it in the same way I'm going to answer this, which is, of course, there will be agreements between us, and they'll be arbitrated by an organisation which we agree between us, not normally the European Court of Justice.
Once the UK has left the EU, there will be a £9 billion hole in EU finances. Given reduced resources, why does the government believe that the EU will prioritise negotiating a trade deal with the UK over more lucrative markets such as the US or China?
Well, I'm afraid she's wrong about the more lucrative market bit. I mean, once we're outside the European Union, we are the largest market for the European Union.
EU workers in Scotland contribute £7.5 billion to our economy, not to mention the huge contribution they make to our social fabric. What is he going to do to protect their rights and protect Scotland's place in Europe as they voted for by a majority in the EU vote?
We will not be managing the immigration policy or the migration policy in a way which harms the national interest, and that means not causing labour shortages, not causing shortages of talent and so on. And that applies not just, as it were, globally, it applies to each nation state of the United Kingdom too.
The Northern Ireland Secretary, James Brokenshire, is hoping that campaigning in next month's Assembly elections does not exacerbate tension and division. Northern Ireland is going to the polls on March the 2nd following the collapse of the executive in Belfast. Northern Ireland's Deputy First Minister, Martin McGuinness, resigned last week in protest at the handling of a renewable energy scheme. That meant the First Minister, the Democratic Unionist Arlene Foster, was out of a job too, bringing the Northern Ireland executive to a halt.
Elections, by their nature, are hotly contested. This is part of the essence of our democracy. And nobody expects the debates around the key issues in Northern Ireland to be anything less than robust. I would, however, like to stress the following. This election is about the future of Northern Ireland and its political institutions. Not just the Assembly, but all of the arrangements that have been put in place to reflect relationships through these islands. That is why it will be vital for the campaign to be conducted respectfully and in ways that do not simply exacerbate tensions and division.
I've personally been involved for almost 3 decades in Northern Ireland-related issues. I've learnt one thing, as a political vacuum should be avoided at all costs. So I say this to Secretary of State today, you must make sure that you are not only willing to fill that vacuum, but you must work with all parties to try and seek a way forward, so we avoid the nightmare scenario of 6 weeks of increasingly bitter campaigning, which leaves us in the same place as when it started, with no solution in place to heal a huge divide and to bring together those elected to represent all the people of Northern Ireland.
Lawrence Robertson had just returned from Londonderry.
I did detect and witness a great sense of frustration about what is happening and a great sense of disappointment that the Assembly yet again was under threat and indeed this time has fallen. Does the Secretary of State therefore agree with me and indeed the proposal made by the Shadow Secretary of State that the coming weeks should perhaps be used to explore all possibilities, because none of us do want to see a return to direct rule?
The DUP says Sinn Féin did not opt out because of the Renewable Heat Incentive Scheme, or RHI.
We are deeply disappointed, frustrated and indeed angered by the decision of Sinn Féin to walk away from devolved government and cause this election. And what is this election about? It's very clear it's not about the RHI issue, because had it been, then we could have got on with sorting it out, and indeed this election will serve to disrupt and delay sorting those issues out. What it's about is Sinn Féin seeking opportune political advantage, seeking to overturn the result of the election held just a few months ago, and seeking to gain a list of concessions from the government on legacy issues such as rewriting the past and putting more soldiers and policemen in the dock, and other issues, and more concessions and other concessions from the DUP. Let us be very clear. We will work through this election and afterwards to create devolved government that is stable in Northern Ireland. But let this House know, and the people of Northern Ireland know, that just as we have not given in to Sinn Féin demands in the past, we will not bow down and give in to Sinn Féin's unreasonable demands going forward, because that is what this election is all about.
The SDLP is urging the Northern Ireland Secretary to support an inquiry into the energy scheme.
Without, Mr Speaker, a public inquiry, public confidence in our political settlement will sink even lower and make restoration of the executive even more difficult. And that is what people are telling me on the streets over the last few days and the last week, that they basically need to see clarity, that we're having an election here in a fog.
James Brokenshire replied that the issue was critical in re-establishing the public's trust and confidence. Now, MPs have been told that staffing is the biggest problem facing maternity services in England. The Health Committee heard that enough midwives are being trained, but they're not necessarily being employed. The committee's hearing followed a report from the National Childbirth Trust, which blamed a shortage of midwives for women feeling as though they've been treated like cattle. The NCT study of 2,500 women found that half had experienced a red flag event, such as not getting timely access to pain relief due to a lack of staff.
Clearly, workforce pressures on all the health disciplines associated with maternity care, and I would add health visitors, who are extremely important to women in the postnatal period.
Half of the women you surveyed experienced clinically unsafe care.
Yes, what we looked at was the events which are defined by NICE, in NICE guidance, as red flag events, and they are identified as those that do, in most cases, mean there is a staffing shortage, and in this case, mostly in midwifery. So it was mainly care, processes of care that were delayed. It included medication being given, which might have been pain relief or antibiotics or other drugs needed by women, which was obviously should have been given in a timely fashion, either because the woman was in great pain and requested pain relief, or with antibiotics, obviously they need to be taken as a course, and it's very important that they're taken on time. One woman reported that the bed she'd actually given birth in, she wasn't helped to wash, or the sheets changed for 12 hours, which I imagine is really unpleasant and distressing for her, and almost certainly a risk of greater infection.
While we're training enough midwives, and enough midwives are coming out into the system, the difficulty is that not enough of them are being employed. And although we have been seeing increases in midwifery numbers over the last few years, we're now seeing flatlining. And the number of midwives is actually starting to look as though it's reducing in our services.
The number has been quoted about 2,500, 2,600 of a gap. Is that a figure that you would support?
Well,
that you
our
recognise?
current figure is that we're 3,500 full-time midwives short.
So you feel it's actually worse?
Yes. There are various issues. One is that we are seeing a rapidly increasing number of midwives retiring from the service. So the number of midwives now aged over 50 is very significant. So there's a need to replace as midwives leave, and the number going out is now pretty much equating to the number coming in. So you're getting flat lining of the workforce.
The National Childbirth Trust, talking about findings from their recent survey, that half of the women in their survey received clinically unsafe care because of staffing shortages. How do you respond to that?
Well, my understanding of what that assessment is that since we've had the NICE safe staffing guidelines, we've been able to be much clearer than ever before about when we're not able to meet the safe or the optimum staffing guidelines that we've set for our units. So a red flag essentially means that then the Director of Nursing or Director of Midwifery has got sight of the fact that there is a serious staffing issue within a unit, which I think is a positive, because previously we didn't have that information to know whether we were having a red flag event or not, and people are able to respond accordingly. By and large, our maternity units remain very safe places, but that isn't a position we would want to be in the longer term, and that's why challenging ourselves around workforce going forwards and having the right staff is absolutely critical. And it's also the reason, whilst the national figures are really very useful and we need to better understand what's driving local scenarios as well, because some places are finding it harder to recruit than others, and we need to understand whether some places have got models of working that midwives prefer learn from some of that practice as well.
You're watching Tuesday in Parliament with me, Alicia McCarthy. Now, at the same time that Theresa May was on her feet making her big speech, the Chancellor Philip Hammond was answering Treasury questions. He explained that the UK could not stay in the single market following Brexit because EU leaders made it clear they would not allow curbs on the free movement of people.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the resilience of our economy will be best served by what the Prime Minister has said today, that Britain will be leaving the single market with no ifs and no buts?
Well, Mr. Speaker, for 6 months we've kept open as many options as possible while we review the way forward in this negotiation with the European Union. We've heard very clearly the views and the political red lines expressed by other European leaders. We want to work with them. We want to recognise and respect their political red lines. And that is why the Prime Minister is setting out right now the position that she is, which is that we will go forward understanding that we cannot be members of the single market because of the political red lines around the 4 freedoms that other European leaders have set.
In the 7 years to 2014, Scotland's trade with the EU rose by 20%, twice the rate of growth in trade to the rest of the UK, and vital for a resilient economy. Today's hard Tory Brexit puts that at risk. But is this not also a kick in the teeth to many of those who voted leave, believing there would be an EEA-EFTA type arrangement put in place to mitigate the damage done?
Mr. Speaker, I reject the honourable gentleman's analysis. I think what this is engaging constructively with the real world, recognising the political red lines of our European Union partners, because if we don't recognise them, frankly, we're banging our heads against a brick wall. They have to recognise our political red lines, we have to recognise theirs, and then we have to work together to find a pragmatic solution that works for all the people of the UK within those red lines. That's what we're doing.
We now know from what the Prime Minister is saying now, she's intent on pulling up the drawbridge, leaving the single market and possibly the customs union. We'll be cutting ourselves off from one of the largest markets on the entire planet, threatening jobs and public finances. This isn't a clean Brexit, it's an extremely messy Brexit, with the consequences we already see in terms of the rise in the rate of inflation. Now, with real living standards squeezed by this policy announcement so far, isn't it time, and I appeal to the Chancellor, he has the opportunity then to reconsider his cuts to in-work benefits and in the budget in March, withdraw them in full?
No, Mr. Speaker. What the Prime Minister is setting out today is an ambitious agenda for a Britain engaged with the world and a Britain engaged with the European Union. What she's setting out is a broad-based offer for future collaboration in trade, in investment, in security, in education, in technical and scientific collaboration, and many other areas. We want to remain engaged with the European Union, and I am confident that the approach the Prime Minister is setting out today will allow us successfully to negotiate a comprehensive future relationship with the European Union.
Philip Hammond. Well, let's stay with Brexit, because later in the Commons, MPs debated the impact of leaving the EU on the rural economy. The National Farmers Union says UK farmers' contribution to the economy grew to almost £10 billion in 2014, and that the food and farming sector as a whole is worth £108 billion. The debate had been called by the SNP, and its spokesman worried about the future.
Under the government's current direction of travel, Brexit will not be a clean break for the sheep farmers in my constituency, whose produce could face prohibitive tariffs and whose direct support payments could be wiped out. It will not be a clean break for the fish processors in Shetland, where more fish was landed than in the entirety of England and Wales in 2015, but whose access to the largest seafood market in the world is now under question. Nor will it be a clean break for the soft fruit farmer in Angus, where when the plug is pulled on seasonal labour, his business needs to function. And it will not be a clean break for the most remote Highland communities that are now contemplating the loss of hundreds of millions of pounds in European regional development funding. We find ourselves facing a combination, once again, of Tory indifference to the needs of the Scottish economy and a dramatic democratic deficit. Yes, I will give way.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman giving way, and he and his party are optimistic people and rays of sunshine in this House. I wonder if you can't see any possible benefit to the Scottish rural economy, particularly fisheries, the European policy of which decimated the Scottish fishing industry.
I thank the honourable member. Actually, if you come and spend a little bit more time with us, you'll find us, we are optimists at heart. But what this debate is about, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the realities.
Incomes are falling and debts are rising. Incomes were down by a shocking 29% last year. A fifth of farmers are struggling just to pay their bills. The average debt for a farming business is now £188,500, and too many have gone out of business altogether, including more than 1,000 dairy farmers in the last 3 years. So not all farmers are thriving or even surviving.
I'm determined that we secure a deal on leaving the EU that works for all parts of the UK and recognises the contribution that all corners of this country make to our economic success.
Will she also make it a priority to publish proposals to have a British fishing industry where we can catch more of our own fish and protect our fishing grounds for the future?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. He makes a very good point about the potential for all UK fishing, and I do hope that our policies, when we come to them after consultation, will enable us to deliver exactly as he asks for.
Andrea Leadsom. Finally, ministers have faced calls for a root and branch reappraisal of business rates after warnings about the impact of re-evaluation on high street shops. The Communities and Local Government Minister Lord Bourne told peers that business rates were based on independent valuations and that most would see no change or a fall in their bills from April due to a re-evaluation.
Business rates are based on valuations carried out independently by the Valuation Office Agency, and it's right that ministers do not intervene in that process. Nearly 3/4 of all businesses will see no change or a fall in their rates bill from April thanks to the 2017 revaluation, with 600,000 businesses set to pay no business rates at all.
Nevertheless, the core of the high street is badly affected in many parts of our country. There was an article in Saturday's Times about Southwold, not a huge place. The local bakers' rates are going up from 4,000 or just over to 14,000. And against that background, will my noble friend look at the possibilities of revising the proposals where an increase is up to 15%? The rules at the moment suggest that there can be no appeal. Secondly, that where there is a small reduction or any reduction, that reduction is paid in April and not phased in.
Many peers thought Lord Naisby's question had gone on too long, but he had one final suggestion to make.
Finally, my Lord, is it not time for a whole root and branch reappraisal of this form of business tax?
My Lords, most businesses, as I've indicated, will be seeing a fall in their business rates. Those that are subject to increases, of course, it's phased in over a period of time. To take just one area which my noble friend touched upon, and that is paid for by those that are seeing a reduction, which is also phased in over a period of time, as is required by law under the 1988 Local Government Finance Act, my lords.
As a simple sailor, there must be something wrong. When you look at high streets around the country, they're full of charity shops, estate agents and the odd coffee shop. They seem to be falling, but there must be something wrong with what is going on.
My lords, I would certainly not call the noble lord a simple sailor for 1 minute, but my lords, it's true that many high streets are thriving. I visit many high streets that are thriving. In essence, my lords, what is important is that we seek to protect small and medium-sized businesses. We've been doing that, my lords, and that is the way forward.
Lord Bourne. And that's it from me for now. But do join me at the same time tomorrow when, among other things, we'll have the highlights from Prime Minister's questions. But for now, from me, Alicia McCarthy, goodbye.